My Govanen, welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and this is the final video in my series on the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson. This is part 2 of subtle changes that only book fans would notice, and kind of like the first part of this one for The Return of the King, there are several that are kind of interesting. And the very first one is actually kind of interesting too, because it's another one of those where the line is almost exact and the character is the same character, but the context makes it mean something completely different. And this is where Denethor is making his way to the houses of the dead, or the places where he's going to burn himself and Faramir alive. And he delivers this line, which is almost word for word out of the book. He says, I am the steward of the house of Inari, and thus have I walked, and thus now will I sleep. In the book, the line is, thus have I walked, and thus for, I don't remember exactly the words, but it's either thus for many years, or for a long time, or something to that effect, have I slept. And in the book, what he's talking about is the fact that he is wearing armor and a sword under his cloak, or whatever exactly it is he's wearing over it. It looks like he's just wearing normal clothes for the Steward of Gondor, but in fact he's wearing armor and a sword under it. And his point in the book is he has been basically prepared for war against Sauron for years now, and has been awaiting this kind of moment. In the movie, he's talking about something completely different, because he's basically saying, I'm about to die, and that's what he means by sleep. So, the word sleep has a radically different meaning in the movie than it does in the book, and it's one of those lines, again, that if you really only read the book one time, you might remember the phrasing, but you wouldn't necessarily remember the exact context or what he's referring to, because it's kind of a small moment. This one is a little bit different, because this one really is a change it's one of those where in the context of the movie it seems to make sense, and so you might forget that it's actually different from the book. And that is when Shelob stings Frodo, what happens in the book is she comes out of a hole and then just runs up behind him, basically at full speed, and Sam sees it coming from behind and is unable to stop it because Gollum gets him from behind. In the movie, Shelob sneaks up on Frodo from above, really. And so the difference is pretty stark, but it's also one of those things where, because of the changes they make in the movie, it kind of makes sense, because in the book, Frodo and Sam are together. They have both just escaped Shelob's tunnels, and Frodo is so, I don't know exactly what word I want to use here, but he's so hyped up that they've made it out that he's really kind of not paying attention to anything, and that's why Shelob can just run up behind him and not really be even noticed, because he's just so not thinking about it anymore. Whereas in the movie, he's all by himself, and he's obviously wary and, paying attention and being careful, so Shelob does have to sneak up on him. So it's interesting because of the way the movie changed so many other things that mess up the context. By this point, you've probably kind of lost track of some of the details, and because of the way that it goes down, it makes so much sense that you might forget that this is actually a different way of Shelob getting to Frodo than what actually happens. Here's another change involving Shelob, and it's one that I'm really kind of disappointed in. It's the final moment in Sam and Shelob fighting that Sam finally gets Shelob. And in the book, Shelob crushes down on Sam. He's just holding the sword up. He's not actually trying to stab her per se. But in the movie, he very much does do the stabbing. And the whole point in the book is that Shelob's skin is too thick for Sam to pierce, even with Sting from below, but because her weight and strength is so much, she does the job for him. And so basically she stabs herself, in a sense. And in the movie, they just make Sam, be the one who does it, which they don't really establish so well in the movie, that her hide is that thick. It's kind of understandable, I guess, but I'm kind of annoyed by it, because it's a great example of how the bad guys tend to hurt themselves by their own pride and arrogance. So it's one of those where I kind of wish they had found a way to make that work in the movie, but it's one of those where, again, it's a subtle change, and if you don't really remember the book, you wouldn't necessarily remember that difference, because both of them do involve Sam pointing up and Shelob coming down and sword going in. After Shelob has been defeated, Sam goes up to where Frodo is and finds him unconscious, and after a while trying to get him to wake up, he says, "Not asleep, dead." The line is exact, the character is exact, seemingly the context is exact. Why is this a subtle difference? Well, it's a subtle difference because of something that should have happened way back in the Fellowship of the Ring when they were looking in the Mirror of Galadriel. And by they, I mean Frodo and Sam. In the movie, Sam doesn't look in the mirror, so this doesn't work anymore. But way back then, in the book, Sam looks in the mirror and he sees Frodo in this position, seemingly asleep. And that's what he thought at the time. And now when he actually gets to the point and he realizes what's happened, he's been, attacked by Shelob, he assumes he's dead. And so when he says the line, it means, I thought what I saw then was him asleep, not dead. Now he's not asleep, he's dead. Whereas in the movie, it's all just in this one little context of, I think he's asleep, now I realize he's not. So the difference there is very subtle, and you have to remember all this from back in the Fellowship of the Ring for it even to make sense. Alright, now we leave Frodo and Sam again, and we go back to the war in Minas Tirith and the Pelennor fields and all that mess. And we get the lines by Theoden, and we've already kind of covered this because we talked about Éomer stealing part of Theoden's lines from this moment. But it's the moment where they're about to charge at the Pelennor fields, and Theoden says, "Ride to ruin in the world's ending," and, then he yells, "Death, death, death." This is actually what I was talking about when I said they amalgamated a couple different things, because this set of lines from Theoden is not actually from this point in the book, nor is it actually from Theoden. It's actually from just a little bit later, after Theoden has been killed by the Witch King, and then, I don't remember if Éomer has found out that Éowyn was also there yet or not, but at any rate, Éomer, at least after Theoden's death, is now in this state of absolute rage and kind of despair, but not exactly despair, because his battle lust is basically taking the despair and turning it into, okay, well, we're all just going to go out in a blaze of glory. So it's actually Éomer in that moment who says these lines, and he means it kind of literally. He's saying, "Ride to ruin in the world's ending." It's like everything's lost, we're all going to die, but we're going to, ride into it and go for it anyway. And death, he's shouting death because he's like, we're all going to die. So it's a very different kind of context, but you'll recognize the lines probably if you've ever read the book, because they are kind of, they stand out for sure, but exactly who said it and why, it makes some sense in both contexts, and it's just, remembering that Éomer said it in that specific context versus Theoden in this one is not something you're necessarily going to remember after just one casual read through the book. Alright, this next one is a bit unique because what makes it a subtle change is not exactly who says it or what it means in the context or any of this kind of stuff. It's something a little different. This is the scene where Gandalf is telling Pippin about Valinor. Well, he never uses the word Valinor, but he describes it as it is described in the book when Frodo sails west, and it talks about the gray rain curtain is turned to silver glass and draws back, and you see a far green country under a swift sunrise, and all this, it's one of Tolkien's best, descriptions of anything in the book, for my money. And in the book, we actually get it twice, because Frodo dreams about it, and then he actually experiences it. Here we get Gandalf describing it, which, of course, it would be hard to do in any other way properly in the book, because how are you going to get that description? I mean, you can't just say it out loud with Frodo or something like that. You could have him describe a dream maybe, but even that would be a little awkward because we skip a lot of dreams in this book. I think the only dream we actually get is Faramir's, and they gave that to Eowyn. But the point is, it's really difficult to put this in the movie in any good way that actually matches the book, and so it kind of makes sense that Gandalf describes it, because Gandalf has been to Valinor. He's never sailed west to Valinor, so he actually wouldn't get that same exact experience on his own, and so it kind of doesn't make a ton of sense in his, from him exactly, but nevertheless, it kind of works. But the reason I say that this is a subtle change that only real book fans would notice is because of who he's saying it to and what he's intending to convey with it. Because Gandalf is telling this to Pippin as basically, when you die, this is what happens. As if you die and then you go to heaven, right? That's not what Valinor is. It really isn't. And unless you really know your Tolkien, you don't know this. A lot of people get this impression from reading The Lord of the Rings, that when Frodo sails west at the end of the story, he's going to heaven in some sense. He's not. He is going to the Undying Lands, where he will be basically treated for his wounds and cared for until he does die, which, based on other things Tolkien wrote, would probably be faster than he otherwise would have in Middle-earth, but it's not like he's going to heaven. What will happen is Frodo will die. He will go to the Halls of Mondos, that part of the Halls of Mondos set aside for mortals, i.e. men, because hobbits are just a branch of the race of men, and then nobody knows where they go after that. After that, probably he ends up in heaven, but that's not what Valinor itself is. So the subtle difference here that only real book fans would notice is one that you wouldn't even necessarily get just by reading The Lord of the Rings. You would have to actually read a bunch of other stuff to really understand exactly why what Gandalf is saying in the movie is a bit misleading. This next one is arguable because, in one sense, it shouldn't be that hard to catch as a change, but for a long time, at least, I was in the position of thinking it was a little odd, because we tend to think of Frodo as the protagonist, and therefore the way it happens in the book is easy to forget, at least for me, for a long time. And for others it may not be the case, so maybe this is just a personal thing, but this is the scene where Frodo wakes up after everything has gone down and he's been brought back to Minas Tirith. In the book it happens in the field of Cormallen. I'm not worried about that change so much, because this is not, that change is not very subtle at all, and it's also one that it totally makes sense given that we're trying to fit all of this material into one movie. The point being, though, when Frodo wakes up, Sam is already awake in the movie. And in the book, it's actually the other way around. Sam is the last one to wake up. And what I'm getting at is Sam is waking up last, in a sense, because by this point in the story, he's become the main hero. As Tolkien will say in one of his letters, that Sam is the chief hero of the story. But Frodo, for the majority of the story, we've been thinking of as the protagonist. And so it makes sense, kind of subjectively, that he would be the one to wake up last. And this has happened before, where he has been the last one to wake up. So, the whole Rivendell thing, and it's not like anybody else was asleep or passed out or anything, but I mean, we get that kind of thing from his perspective in the story before this point, and so it would make sense for Frodo to again be in that position, especially since Frodo really was the one who should have been the most exhausted and the most worn down and the closest to death between the two of them, because he'd been carrying the ring the whole time and all this other stuff. Now, probably the reason why he's not is because Sam sacrificed a lot of his own well-being for Frodo's sake. But, again, the point I'm getting at is, unless you just remember off the top of your head and really paid attention in the book to the fact that Sam is actually the one who woke up second, to me it seems kind of natural to assume that Frodo would be the one to wake up last. And so it's one that I think would be easy to miss for casual readers. Now, again, maybe that's just me, but I put it in here because it's my video, and I'm talking about stuff that I think is a subtle change that Peter Jackson made. So your mileage may vary, but this is me, so whatever. All right, final one for this video. This video ended up being a lot less than the previous one. Maybe I should have split it somewhere between the two discs. Anyway, the ride to the Grey Havens is different, and it's not super subtle in the sense that it's everything about it is kind of different, and so it's not that subtle in one sense. The subtle thing, at least from my perspective here, is that Merry and Pippin are with Frodo and Sam the whole time. They make the entire trip with them. And that doesn't happen in the book. In fact, in the book, it's actually a really interesting ending, and I think it was really smart on Tolkien's part to do it this way, because Frodo and Sam set out, and then they meet Elrond and Bilbo and a bunch of other people and make their way to the Grey Havens, and Sam is now facing the prospect of having to ride back all alone after he's just said goodbye to Frodo forever, seemingly. And then Merry and Pippin ride up, and they basically say, this time it was actually Gandalf who gave you away, Frodo. And Gandalf says, yeah, I thought it would be best for Sam to be able to ride back 3 together rather than 1 alone. And it's a really touching moment because Merry and Pippin, you know, you're starting to think aren't even going to get to have their goodbye, and Sam is going to have this really painful, crushing goodbye, and then have to ride from the Grey Havens all the way back to the Shire. And by the way, that's a several-day journey, probably, by the looks of the map. If you take a look at it, it's not like they just jaunted over in a couple of hours. And it's a really, really touching way for Gandalf to make it a little bit better and easier on everybody. And it's understandable why Peter Jackson changed that, because it's kind of a subplot that's unnecessary, but it does lose something. And it's a thing that's easy to miss, because why wouldn't Merry and Pippin be with him? Well, you know, in the book, there's reasons why they wouldn't be with him. They're busy doing their own things, and Frodo and Sam have by far the closer connection than the others. And so he would want Sam to be there, but he wouldn't necessarily want everybody to be there. So, you know, it makes sense. And then Gandalf telling Merry and Pippin makes a lot of sense on his side. So it makes sense in the book, but it also makes sense why they would not go to all that trouble in the movie, because it needlessly lengthens out the 5th ending of the movie. You know, if you're one of those people who criticizes the movie for having too many endings. But it's subtle in the sense that it's easy to miss because it's so natural from the movie perspective to think that Merry and Pippin would go with him, and seemingly unnatural in one way that he wouldn't have Merry and Pippin go with him. But, you know, it is a significant change with a significant impact on how that part of the story ends, and therefore I think it's worth noting, because if you're not paying a whole lot of attention and you only read the book one time, you're not going to catch this, because it is so natural, but it's kind of profound in its own way. And so, you know, I just think that this one is actually kind of a nice one to end on, because it's a really good example of how decisions that make a lot of sense from the adaptation point of view can still really, really lose something from the book and leave us missing things. And it's just a really great example of the book is always, you know, the ideal. You want to get the book. Is the movie a great movie? Sure. Is it maybe the best adaptation we're ever going to get in a visual medium? Sure. Is it as accurate as we could probably hope anything coming out of Hollywood to be? Probably. Is it really the thing that we want? No. I mean, what you really want is the book. Read the book again. You know, do it once every year or two. You know, remind yourself of all this cool stuff that got left out, changed, whatever. But, yeah, the real deal is Tolkien. Always has been, and nothing will ever approach it. So that is the end of my series on looking at Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings from both nitpicking, from, you know, things that he got right, and finally things that he subtly changed that you might not have noticed if you weren't a rabid book fan. Hope you've enjoyed all of these videos. Please like and share this one around if you enjoyed this one in particular. Make sure you subscribe if you want to catch my future content. If you're on YouTube, make sure you to click that bell icon so you don't miss any notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter for Tolkien-related trivia questions every week, and check out the other support and social links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore Channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Nathan Dufour, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.